Hey everyone, welcome to the #1 podcast for everything iOS. Today we have a very special post-WWDC Q&A episode for you, so get ready. This is iPhone and iPad Live.
It's June 20th, 2012, and I'm Georgia, and joining us today is the co-host of Iterate and the hottest thing on the planet, Seth Clifford, the CIO of Nickelfish. That's it.
I'm the hottest thing. Something else is the hottest. How's it going?
Okay, we'll try someone else then.
All right.
Okay, it's going. I'm completely fried, but excited to be able to go through this and some WWDC Q&A. So, because it is such a special event, we also asked the App Cubby's own David Barnard.
Hi, it's good to be here.
Hey. Were you waiting for the more amazing intro that I gave to Seth?
Exactly. I wanted to be the new hotness.
The new hotness? Well, we're just gonna have to keep on trying. So let's see as well. One of the top 100 people to follow in Apple amazingness, the editor-in-chief of iMore.com, Rene Ritchie.
Do I get to be the new hotness too, or am I still the old broken?
Well, you're one of the hottest people to follow. It wasn't even like my own spin on it. It's an official thing.
It's a
so
Business
I don't even
Insider
know
thing.
if you can be on this show anymore.
Oh, all right. No, I'm on the show. You people are awesome. I'm thrilled to be in your presence.
Rene, you get to be the new hotness when you fix the lower thirds.
What's wrong with the lower thirds?
Mine said David, and David said Seth.
Oh, all right.
So David, according to Georgia, you're me, which automatically makes you the new hotness. So congratulations.
Maybe you guys have it wrong.
Should we like do a retake there? Start over.
Do you want to do over, Georgia? Or do you want to plow along?
I don't care. Let's just get
Let's
on
just
with it.
go.
I don't know.
I'll fix it in post.
We got a lot to talk about. Let's do it.
All right, I fixed it in the meantime.
Did you?
Yeah, it's live TV. We're making sausage.
That's right.
And today it is all about WWDC.
Yeah, get your questions ready. We've been inundated with questions.
So let's talk about it. WWDC, questions, answers. We're gonna go through it. Chat room, whatever you have, we're gonna talk about it. Yeah. So Rene, give me your overall thoughts. What was it like?
I thought it was a great show. I think that anybody who had their expectations reasonably set, anybody who reads and I don't mean to say this egotistically, but anybody who reads a common sense, the right kind of blogs, knew what to expect, got what they expected. I think it's fair to say that this was more of a talk than a tick update for Apple. I think that they tend to do that, the big thing and then the small thing, and this was more of a refinement. I'll let David talk about what it means for developers, but I think for users, it was just removing friction, making things easier and a little bit funner to use.
So Seth, do you agree? Were you let down with what was offered?
No, not at all. I thought it was a good keynote. I did not expect any outrageous stuff. I did not expect really new, iPhone hardware, as some people were still hoping against hope up until that point. I expected Mountain Lion coverage and iOS 6 with a possible sprinkling of MacBook updates, which is exactly what we got. And while I'm more excited about iOS 6, the Mountain Lion stuff looked good. The demos and everything went off without a hitch. It's definitely a compelling upgrade for people that kind of are on that path, who are enjoying Lion, who are looking forward to getting some of the kind of the bells and whistles of iOS without having to, use iOS, let's say. But iOS 6 is, as Rene said, it's polishing the rough edges. It's adding a lot of little things to the operating system that are going to really smooth out the experience, really add a lot of little things that make a huge difference. And I'm sure we'll get into the details, so I don't want to ramble on too much. But I was definitely impressed with the keynote. The sessions were fantastic. And overall, I think it was a really good showing, a really good week.
David, can you say the same thing? Were you actually impressed with the keynote? Do you think that they did a good job post-jobs?
I was actually really impressed. I told several people right after the keynote that I thought that was Schiller's best. I thought it was all of their best keynote ever. Forstall, Schiller, what do you say? Is Federici? They were all just really solid. I think it was the best keynote of their lives, and especially for Phil, that's saying something. I mean, I think next to Jobs, Phil has been the best, and he just knocked it out of the park. I thought, the delivery was excellent, and as Seth said, not a single thing went off. Not a single technical hiccup or any other issues. So, from a user standpoint, and people who are reading all these rumors blogs, I could see some disappointment. But like Rene said, I mean, if you have your head screwed on straight and you're reading the right blogs and setting your expectations correctly, I thought there was a lot to be wowed at in the keynote. And then, as a developer going to the sessions, it's really impressive, all the tools and the things that they're doing behind the scenes. So overall, I thought WWDC was incredible. I think, Apple has not slowed down, and if anything is continuing to accelerate the pace with all their platforms.
Yeah, I think it's...
Out of everything, I think it's a really important thing to mention that they do a great job making a proper, interesting, and informative keynote. They have a fabulous manner of putting up on the screen things that are important. And I know, Rene, you do a lot of conversations and talks on how to make a keynote, a presentation, how to end up dealing with slides so that they're not inundated with information, and keep people interested in the conversation that's happening. Their pace of the way that they speak is also amazing. And when we watch a lot of different keynotes, that's the only time that you can, it's expected from Apple. Steve Jobs started it, and they continued with it. Everyone that went up was clear, concise, didn't mumble. And when I was watching the Surface, keynote fail thing when they were presenting it, that's when I can truly appreciate what a great keynote Apple puts together.
Yeah, what's interesting, I mean, David said this before, and I'll add to it, is that Phil Schiller has always been affable. Like when he filled in for Steve Jobs, he was nice, but he wasn't as commanding as he was now, and he had a much better sense of presence. And Craig Federici, he was on stage once before, maybe twice before, and he was kind of awkward, more the programmer guy than the showcase guy. And he had like a step to him. He was laughing, he was engaged, he made the Captain Hairdo jokes. It was really good. And Forstall has gone from confident to almost strutting a little bit. I mean, he's been on stage since... I think he's been on stage since iOS, since 2008 with the introduction of the iOS SDK, and he's gotten better and better every time. I mean, he's using less cache phrases, he's being more comfortable. And Tim Cook started it and ended it. He anchored it at both ends. He gave Apple this really cool, intelligent sort of vibe, but he also gave it an emotional heart with those videos about, they did autistic children this year. FaceTime was... sign language last year. Siri was blind people this year. They had kiosk mode for autistic people. They talked about making a difference in the world. So they really stretched and covered the bases. And doing everything at once, Macs and Mountain Lion and iOS, this is Apple like doing almost like a U.S. Navy kind of projection of force at this point.
Even when Apple fails, like the whole MiFi thing, it was interesting how... I think it's just a difference in philosophy. Like when Steve is on stage, he knows he's got the hottest thing in the world. And so he was pissed at everybody else when something went wrong. It's like he knew it wasn't his device. He knew it wasn't I guess it was the iPhone he was demoing, the Retina display at that time. It was like he knew that was badass. He didn't have to make any excuses. And so, it seems like most other people, when you have a failure in a tech demo or they get lost in their slides or something like that, it's like they go into this like catch up apologetic mode. And Apple, when they screw up, it's like, hey, it's not our fault.
Yes.
We have this freaking awesome thing. We're showing you something went wrong. No big deal. We'll get back on track.
The world's not awesome enough for our thing.
Yeah, and they're so relaxed and calm. Even if something screws up, he'll yell, he'll get upset, but it's still in this, he's the authority in the room. We talk about that a lot about in therapy or when you're teaching something, but when you're giving a presentation, you have to believe. And when things are screwing up and you see the person panicking and freaking out and then running to get something else, you're letting your cards show. It would be a horrible poker face to play. You'd want to play poker against the person that would be able to show that. Yeah, it's like that would not even be a maybe.
All right. No, we have a lot to get to, and I don't want to. Georgia has a show after this. I don't want to step on her toes at all. So, a couple things. One of the things is we get asked this a lot. Why aren't you blogging about all the problems with iOS 6? And a bunch of the questions we got here tonight is the same thing. Why is this a problem? iOS 6 is not public software. It's private software. It's not generally available. You have to sign up to be a developer. You have to sign a non-disclosure agreement, and it's for developers to test their software. There are no public-facing bugs in iOS 6 because it's not public. So we don't think it's fair to write about them because they really don't exist as far as the general community is aware right now.
Who the heck is asking about iOS 6 bugs?
Oh, everybody, man. It's crazy. They're complaining.
Seriously?
Yeah.
This is like trying to drive. This is like trying to drive a car off the assembly line while it's being assembled.
Yes.
Like, why isn't this car going? Come on, what's up?
Dude, you asked for a factory tour. I know, but
It's ridiculous.
I don't think it's that ridiculous. I think that people are looking to see what is happening with it, how buggy is it, how stable it is. And Apple will expect that will happen. Again, if you're signing a do not, disclose, you're not going to be able to discuss all of the different things. And it makes sense for the developers to get to try it out, make sure that all the applications will work. And to get the bugs fixed. There's nothing wrong with having bugs, and as long as you're going to fix them and do it in a timely manner, which Apple is exceptionally good at.
Yeah, well, and so here's the thing, like as a developer, I'm not even that worried about bugs in my apps yet because so Apple typically releases between 4 and 6, I think up to 8 betas between the initial release to developers and shipping. So, and looking at recent history, it's very likely that iOS 6 won't even ship till October. So we have, 5 months to be looking at this thing and fixing bugs. Well, for most apps, fixing bugs is, at most a week, maybe 2 weeks, and then, a week or two of pretty hardcore testing. If you're fixing your bugs now and expecting that to work and like doing some like crazy re-implementation of your code just to fix a bug in beta 1 of iOS 6, you're not paying attention. Like that's not how you do things. I mean, you can fix some small things like with Launch Center Pro. I mean, it's not even out yet. And we made one quick fix to a bug that was causing it just like not to work. And so we want people to still be able to use our app, even if iOS 6 is buggy. But we did, one very small thing. And, I don't know, people, I think people's understanding of beta has been very shifted. And when Apple does an OS beta, it is an OS beta.
Yes. Beta.
So, I mean, yeah, people just need to get that. And developers need to get that too, because, we already submitted a bug because the thing that was crashing Launch Center Pro is actually a bug with Apple. Like they changed one of their frameworks. And so we already submitted a bug, and I bet you in beta 2 or 3, that bug's going to be fixed. So we didn't necessarily have to do anything for Launch Center Pro to eventually get fixed. We put a temporary thing on there that's going to be easy to get rid of. But, I mean, with these iOS betas, things are still in very, very, very big flux.
Yeah, early days.
And Microsoft demoing iOS 6 Safari is asinine. I can't believe they did that. And I hope that Apple gives them a huge hard time about all of their developer accounts and talks to them about breaking NDA and stuff because, so I've been running iOS 6 beta on a iPod Touch, which is a single core device. It is actually slow as hell on a single core device, which tells me that Apple's not optimized it yet for the single core device. But I hear on a dual core device like the 4S or the iPad 3, it's actually pretty fast. So, but that's typical. You don't optimize. You don't have to optimize to perfection at this stage in a beta. So anyway, I could go on and on about this, but I'll stop.
Well,
it was,
Rene,
everything.
Yeah. Well, Rene,
Yeah.
talking about like getting away from the bugs, what are people going to get from iOS 6? How is Apple going to impress
Well,
us?
let me just let me add one more thing into the end because I just want to make this clear too. Is that developers like David are not allowed to actually submit binaries based on iOS 6 APIs yet. That'll be after the Gold Master. Usually, Apple tells them when they can do it. So if you're running iOS 6, developers can try as much as they can to fix it using the existing SDK, but they can't upload based on the new SDK. So take it easy on them in the App Store. Anyone who's running iOS 6 basically shouldn't be leaving bad app reviews because of crashes, bugs, and stuff like that, because that's just not nice. That's not right.
You can email your bugs to me, and I'll tell you what's wrong with you.
Do that.
You need to set up an autoresponder for like iOS 6 bugs at appcubby.com and then just berate them.
Can I start on the questions, George? Is that cool?
Yeah, please.
So John wants to know, why was there no update in iOS 6 for the home screen or notification center? Are we stuck in a never-changing home screen? And I'd like to get your guys' opinion on this, because this is Apple-facing legacy users. They have 100 million of my mom who's very comfortable hitting home, hitting app, hitting home, hitting app. And they made the iPad exactly the same as the iPhone and said 100 million users already know how to use it. And changing that kind of stuff is hard. And Microsoft knows that. Apple's always been fearless, but they never had that install base. We've heard for a long time rumors of Springboard refreshes. Seth, what do you think?
I think that it's probably easier for nerds like us to say, oh, Springboard is tired and we need it to change, than it is for it to actually change, for the reasons you just went over. Microsoft had a huge install base with Windows. Windows XP was an enormously dominant operating system in the early and mid 2000s. And there's a reason why even prior to that, and, starting with Windows 95 and then all the way up through what we currently have with Windows 7, there's a reason that things are kind of in the same place with a slightly different shine to them. It's because people expect them to be someplace. And if you have a giant install base, you have to plan for every possible use case and lowest common denominator understanding of your software. And while it's easy to say we want widgets and we want more functionality and, Springboard is boring, there are so many people who just barely understand how to use their iPhone and really love it, that Apple is really not inclined to pull the rug out from them, because they're going to lose a lot of goodwill to, in doing stuff like that. And that's something that's hard to remember, because we talk about this stuff constantly and at such a granular level, but we are not the target demographic for this stuff.
Is it fair to say, and maybe I'll throw this David's way, that also Apple just did the first preview of iOS 6. Last year, we didn't even see Siri until the iPhone 4S announcement. So I think it's also important to remember that what the final version of iOS 6 may or may not have features beyond what we've seen so far.
Yeah, so I'm not going to say too much, but iOS 6 is definitely not final. I agree with Seth, though. I don't think that the home screen is going to see a significant change for all the reasons he outlined. And I will say, I'm a little biased on this, but Apple approving Launch Center Pro, which was at no point a given. I think in some ways maybe them saying, okay, look, we understand that a decent portion of our users are looking for a more productive solution. And of course, if we didn't have sandbox apps and we didn't have a lot of the restrictions, Launch Center Pro could be a true home screen replacement. There's a lot of really cool stuff we'd love to do. But given the sandbox environment, we've done some really cool stuff with Launch Center Pro. And I think them, saying, okay, which, technically it sort of violates some of the 10.4 rules of not looking like the home screen of the iOS home screen and some other things. So, up until the last minute, I wasn't even sure they were going to approve the app. And, so it seems like, with Sparrow and a bunch of other apps, they're kind of starting to loosen up a little bit with the, not duplicating functionality stuff. And I think it's partly for this reason, that they kind of see the divergence in the user base, and they're going to keep catering to the next 50 million people who buy iPhones. And those next 50 million people aren't the early adopters, or not the hackers. They're the people who are still on dumb phones, and people like my mom and my grandma. And so I don't think we're going to see huge changes to things like the home screen. But I hope Notification Center and some of those other aspects are still, in flux, and that we might see some new stuff.
And there's always, like, George, I think you mentioned this last time, Apple always likes to have the big demo and the big commercial for the new phone, and they're going to have something that's flashy enough to show off.
I think that they will. I think that they always put on a little bit more after, and just having the new phone as it is going to be a huge showing. So we'll only have better things to come. I'm hoping for Siri being a killer.
Well, they already announced that you'll be able to launch apps with Siri. So Siri's become already a secondary app launcher, which, Google Voice Command did that with the Nexus One. But this still, we now have things like what David does, which allows you to use an app to quickly tap your way into actions, not apps, but right into actions. Siri can launch apps and launch actions. The home screen can launch apps. I wrote an article saying I wish Spotlight would be allowed to be used as a front end for Siri, because I think there's sometimes where it's not socially appropriate, or not, maybe the voice parser is not working well, and it'd be easier to type a query than to say it. But I think there's multiple I think keeping the back end the same is really important, but multiple paths of entry will be good one day. We have a question from Graham. Can I please keep Google Maps on iOS 6? I like Street View. What do you guys... So Google could make Google... So Apple, now they removed Google Maps from the iPhone. They replaced it with an Apple Maps product that uses TomTom data. It's a whole new Maps app. It does not have Street View. It does not have transit directions, but it does have flyover, and it does have free turn-by-turn navigation. So... Georgia, do you think yeah?
Can I say something first of all?
Yeah.
My husband actually brought up this point, but flyover, its purpose, cool. But besides that, unless I'm actually flying a plane, its use is...
It's demoware.
Minimalistic, really. Like, it's kind of cool. It's a neat trick, but I would much rather have be able to figure out transits, to have more... Like, out of all of the things that they could spend the time on, I don't know. It's a little bit, as Jay Whitall from the chat room says, a little gimmicky.
I think that's fair. I think it's a really good demo, but Seth, David, do either of you have a good functionality reason for that?
I back in another life, I think it was 97. I was working at a real estate company doing GIS. I was a freshman in college, but was doing this on the side. And we did a lot of demos with this kind of flyover technology, where we take aerials and lay them over terrain. And, in really flat areas or building or areas without a lot of tall buildings, it's not as compelling. But when you're trying to get the lay of a land, when you're trying to kind of orient yourself to something, the 3D perspective can be really cool, and it can really help orient you to landmarks, to buildings, to kind of things to watch. And then especially given that a lot of places are going to have like San Francisco and places, downtown Austin, places like that, are going to have a lot of terrain. There's even an aspect to kind of orienting to the terrain. So I think once we get to play with it a little more, and I haven't even spent much time in Maps on iOS 6, but I think it's definitely like demoware kind of in general, but I think it's going to be more useful than people think.
I think that it's only really useful, though, if you could, fly over and then take it down to Street View at your own.
So that's a
calling.
Good point.
Having it just be on its own an overscape view, really, its use is minimalistic at best.
No, but with that flyover stuff, you can. I mean, they showed it in the demo. You can use your two fingers to change the pan orientation. You can zoom in and move around and all that kind of stuff. So, are you talking about the turn by turn directions, or
no? I think she wants Street View back so she can see what the building looks like.
Oh, right.
Yeah, take it all the way down to
the coffee shop.
That's another thing. I mean, Google has spent a lot of time and money to do Street View, but I'm not sure how many patents they have on that and whatnot. It's something Apple could do over time, but it'd definitely be a Herculean effort for them.
Now we did an article before this came out saying like basically adjust your expectations down for maps because it was getting a bit crazy with all the stories. And at no point has anyone ever seen large amounts of Apple buses out there taking pictures for Street View. So the other Lewis was here says, what does iOS 6 maps using TomTom data mean for the TomTom app? Nothing. Apple takes the low part of it, and TomTom still has the high end. But my question, and I'll ask Georgia because she's probably predisposed to have an opinion on this. Do you think Google will release Google Maps into the App Store? If they do, does Apple now have to accept it? And then will we have the best of both worlds on iOS?
That sounds great. That's a really great question. I would love for Google to release Google Maps into the App Store. I think that Apple will take its time in accepting it. I think it would be really hard for them to say no to it. One is because I think that Apple wants their customers to be happy, and they have no want to have anyone go to another application. I use Maps a lot. I get lost anywhere. But I think that they'll take time because they want people to get used to things, and we are lazy by nature. We're going to stay with whatever we feel most comfortable with. So I think that Apple would take their time in accepting it just so that people that are using the phone will get used to their own map products, and hopefully they wouldn't do it.
I'm not wrong, Seth.
Seth, do you think that
the Google Maps app on Android is way better than the one on iOS, and we could be getting all that functionality?
Oh man, Google Maps on Android is unbelievable. If you've used it on the Galaxy Nexus or any of the newer phones, it is outstanding. It's just, I mean, I used to look at it and think, why can't this be on the iPhone? And obviously, it's not for obvious reasons. But it would be great.
No, you can say it's because Apple wouldn't take latitude, so Google wouldn't give them turn by turn, and then they had a huge argument about the other stuff.
Well, you said it, so I didn't have to. So I think it would be really awesome to have a third-party Google Map solution on there, especially if they're able to bring that level of functionality to iOS, because those maps are pretty terrific, and there's a lot you can do with them. I don't think that there's any reason why they wouldn't, because they already have so many other Google branded apps in the App Store, and it really, I mean, aside from their wounded pride, there really isn't a good reason for them not to make that entry and just say, okay, you're going to decouple the maps, we're going to put our own app in, and that's that. However, I think it's important that they provide a really stellar mapping experience akin to what's on Android, because some of the app efforts that they've put forth are fantastic, and some of them really are not. And they're just basically websites and wrappers. So that's not something I want to use. I want to use a native feeling mapping solution, whether it is or isn't native. I want it to feel native, and that's really important for Google to do. And then the other thing I wanted to just mention, I said it in the chat room, you said, what does it mean for TomTom? In terms of what it means for other navigation apps, I don't believe that iOS Maps is going to allow you to download and store large amounts of map data. And I won't be deleting Navigon anytime soon for that reason, because if I'm driving around and I have no service at all, my phone will still work with the location services. The GPS will still work, but I won't be able to stream any data to get a map. So I'm still going to need, an offline map solution.
Apple always.
And if you do a lot of traveling.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I think one interesting thing we haven't brought up yet is that all the apps that use the Maps API are going to be swapped in, but I don't think any apps were allowed to use Street View or some of the other functionality as part of the API. So Apple's going to be, Apple already has, and it looks like in the iOS 6 betas that apps that used the Maps API just worked perfectly. Like they just, matched the API calls and methods exactly. And so, all that is going to get switched out. And I mean, a ton of apps use the maps, but Apple providing that as a solution for their platform and for all the apps that use it, I think it's going to be great because you don't need some of that functionality. So I don't see a reason why they wouldn't allow a Google app. And in some ways, it could be really cool because Google could do some stuff with URL schemes that even the current Maps app won't let you do, that we've bumped our head up against with Launcher Pro. So I don't see a reason why Apple wouldn't. And I think overall, it is going to be a great thing for the platform because Google's going to be able to do some really cool stuff on their own that Apple wouldn't necessarily care to do. And then, Apple is providing this developers and continuing to offer a decent, if not great, mapping solution, and and letting third party fill the gaps. So I think it's a win-win-win. And I don't, this is very beta. I mean, again, we have 5 months, and obviously Maps is one of the things Apple's been working hardest on. So the book has not been written yet. So wait until release and judge it then. But I think it's too early to make a full judgment on how crappy the experience is, or how bad it is for the platform, or some of the other hyperbole we've been hearing the last few days.
Yeah, I think it's also important to remember that Apple got a lot of government scrutiny when they wouldn't let Google Voice on the App Store, and they're not going to want that again. And I think it also goes back to show that Apple currently has the best of Apple, the best of Google, and some of the best of Microsoft on their platform. And they're really the only platform that can say that, because no other platform gets anything from Apple. So Google will want Maps on because they're going to want our location data, which they're getting denied now through the official app. And Apple will appease Google users. Our next question is from David. He wants to know what happened to all the rumors about the silver UI before iOS 6. Why didn't Apple basically do a leopard and unify the entire UI? Why are there... I mean, Apple did show a bunch of different apps up on screen. They showed new skins, new colors. If you look closely at them, you'll see the status bar can now change color according to the menu bar. You'll see that there's no hard line in the shadow anymore. The pinstripes are lighter. But there wasn't... Seth, were you expecting sort of a unification of the UI?
I wasn't expecting it, but I was really hoping for it, because I really liked the look of the WWDC app. And those were the pictures that were circulated, like, hey, this could be the next face of iOS. And I feel like it's that way on the iPad. The iPad has that kind of black and silver motif to it. And I really was hoping that they would bring it over and make those two, alike in that way, because I really like it. I think it's really sharp and it's really clean. And I think that it's like kind of forward facing without taking too large a step, and it's still very accessible because all of the textures and everything would still be familiar to people. So what we actually got was a clock bar that changes color.
Yeah, that's not all we got though. So I'll play the Apple fanboy in this group. So I was hoping for more myself. But if you look at what they're doing, the App Store app looks incredible. They showed some screenshots, but when you see it on your device, there's some really nice subtle textures. All of the glyphs are updated and have really great new lighting. Like, the App Store is freaking gorgeous. It's really nice, and I think they're putting some huge efforts into that. Now, the user experience, I'm still not completely sold on some of the aspects of that. Maps, all new Chrome. Several key apps are getting new Chrome, and again, we're not done yet. But it does seem as though Apple's kind of making some distinctions. Like, the Maps is a map app, and it has its own kind of unique feel. The App Store is its own app, and it has its own unique feel. But both of those are beautiful, and obviously somewhere where they're putting a lot of time. Settings, it's still the blue, standard bar. But, do I really care if they update settings? Probably not. Even things like messages and the phone and some other stuff. I mean, honestly, as much as I've been using Launch Center Pro, I don't even go in those apps as much anymore or spend as much time in them. So, it feels like they're kind of spending time on the showcases and not, being as worried about things like settings and phone and messages and mail. But even those, I think, there's possibility to see another refresh before it's all said and done.
Yeah, George, that's an interesting argument, because some people believe that everything, like the status bar should always be black because then you ignore it. It becomes part of the casing. And the interface should always be the same because then it disappears and all you see is the content. But Apple, especially earlier under Steve Jobs, was really a big fan of making boring database stuff look, like Find My Friends plush leather, or Game Center green felt, or, just stuff to make it more accessible to people who weren't digitally native. Did you want more of that, or are you happy with the more what's the right word, eclectic decor they're still hanging?
I like the minimalist look. I want to use my phone. I don't need to be wowed by it. I think the Game Center is an aberration. It's a little bit too much for me. The noises, the colors, the textures. I don't need that. If I want to, I'm going to jailbreak my phone and I will put whatever themes I so wish on it. But I am, so Paul from the chat room says that Game Center is the devil. I want something that works effortlessly, and I understand what it's going to happen. I'm bothered when I go into something that's a native Apple app and it looks funky. I don't want that. I just want it to feel comfortable, and I understand everything that's happening there. So I am.
Yeah, but if you look at the new maps and the new App Store and everything, I consider Game Center is definitely an aberration, and even apps like Find My Friends are an aberration. But as far as the system apps, I wish they would unify around the Maps Silver. But none of those kind of core experience apps are showy or ostentatious, or none of them have the like plush leather stuff. They just have nice subtleties, and so I think they're not taking it too far. And Game Center is one of those things. They probably just said, this is Game Center, let's have a little fun with it. So but no, I agree with you though, George. I mean, I think at the end of the day, a tool should be a tool, and the UI should my goal in developing apps is to create the best tool possible, not create the prettiest tool possible or whatever. So I'm going to spend time on UI, and my apps are heavily themed and textured and things like that. But ultimately, the focus needs to be on the tool, and yeah. I think Apple is doing that for the apps that it's important with.
I think that it's also really important. It's when I'm using something, if it again, if it looks like my grandmother's, kitschy living room, it's probably going to take me out from the experience of using it. It's almost like a font, and I'm sure that on Iterate, Seth and Rene, you guys talk about this a lot, but it's like Helvetica. I want to just use it. I don't want to see it. And if I'm noticing the font, the colors, the textures, and that, I'm not busy.
Did you just call Find My Friends the Comic Sans of apps?
It's so much worse. It's so much worse than that.
It's not that. It is not. It's not great, but it's believe me, it's not worse.
I'm gonna move us along because we have a few. Actually, we're probably gonna have to do 2 episodes of this because we got a ton of questions. This one is interesting, and I don't know how much we can talk about it. I don't have any specific knowledge, so I'm just gonna guess about stuff like this. Is Passbook going to become a mobile payment system like Microsoft Wallet? So if you didn't follow that earlier today, there's Google Wallet, which basically lets you do mobile payments. There's Passbook, which lets you collect mobile coupons, tickets, passes, and other stuff. And Microsoft Wallet kind of does both of those. You can collect all those things together and make payments from the app. And I don't even know if Apple addressed this at WWDC. I don't think they would. There is no NFC or RFID chips in current iPhones. If there are in future iPhones, Apple's not going to talk about it until there's a future iPhone. But Apple has a history of making their APIs fairly abstract. So, for example, before there was GPS, you had the location stuff, and it would use Wi-Fi and cell tower, and then it added GPS. So I don't think there's any, if Apple wanted to, I don't think there's anything stopping them from taking out QR codes, adding NFC or any other mobile payment technology. And oh, by the way, Apple happens to repeatedly tell us that they have the largest stockpile of credit cards in the online universe, which is arguably part of the reason why the App Store was so successful, because they could take money in all these countries and no one else could. So I don't know if you got a chance to see any of the well, I'm sure you saw the keynote, David. To me, that looks like the beginning of a $1 billion play.
I really wonder about this, because I think Apple partnering with TomTom in Maps, and even Apple buying Siri, but then partnering with Mathematica, there's kind of a weird thing going on. And actually the best example is Apple saying, you know what, we don't need to have a social network. Let's partner with the 2 biggest social networks on the planet. So, there's really something to focus. And I think for Apple to continue executing at the level it does, it needs to focus. And you see Google with Android and with other products running off in a million different directions. And what happened with Google Wallet? You can only pay at like 1,000 locations. That's not a great solution. So if Apple were to throw something like NFC into Passbook, it would have to be part of a much bigger play. They would have to like buy Square or form like a huge partnership with somebody like Square, because you don't just throw something. I mean, Apple doesn't just throw something against the wall to see if it's going to stick, and payments is a huge sticking point. The technology is not widely implemented enough in the US and especially worldwide for that to be a great solution out of the box, especially if you're talking, iOS 6 in the fall and new device. So I have very strong doubts of Apple making a big play in the short term unless they bought somebody like Square and partnered with somebody like Visa or, yada, yada.
At WWDC, David actually phrased that as one doesn't just walk into NFC, which was
No. That was a Siri API.
Oh, Siri
APIs, but it would equally apply here. One does not just walk into mobile payments and expect to take over the world.
I think it's a couple of years out, but I can't wait for the day when I can just, not have my wallet with me.
Well, you can with Square, and their footprint is expanding every day. I mean, Square is really kicking ass. They're an incredible company and doing some really great things.
The thing with any type of change, just like we've seen with television, with the music industry, is that it's really hard. Old companies are used to paper and, having their own technology. They make a lot of money in selling, people selling machines that are then licensed through Visa, and they make a certain amount. People have a hard time giving up what they're already used to. So I think that with companies like Square that are already doing it, are pushing the envelope, and then it forces the hand of other companies that might be older school.
So here's a question from, and I think that's absolutely true. Here's a question from Matt, and I should have grouped these better, but he wants to know what happens to the new maps when you lose a data connection. And currently, it's the same thing that happens with the old maps. And while nothing about this was discussed with iOS 6, we heard, I'll make little birdie jokes in a minute, we heard that Apple is getting very aggressive about local caching of things. I mean, there's rumors of a podcast app, and it just sounds like Apple is figuring out that and they announced this for Mountain Lion with Power Nap, that Apple is figuring out that your phone can do stuff when you're not using it. Your Mac can do stuff when you're not using it. And one of the things it can do is download updates, files, binaries, all sorts of things that are less convenient. Things that you don't want a user to have to push a button and then wait 10 minutes for. They can do that while you're busy doing something else. So I wouldn't be surprised if in the future, maybe not this iOS, but in the future, Apple just starts randomly caching maps whenever you're on a Wi-Fi connection nearby. It'll store whatever local maps you have in your vicinity and download your podcasts and whatever else you've subscribed to.
Yeah, I've written about this before, about the kind of sleight of hand that we can do with software. And the biggest constraint here, especially with cloud services, is storage limitations replicating something locally. But Apple can do some really smart things, like if you set up directions, you obviously have some kind of internet connection to be able to set up directions, and so they could cache a certain amount of that path. And even a certain, several layers of detail in that path. And now with the vector maps, that may even be a much smaller thing to do than the bitmap tile maps. So, I think there's a lot of cool stuff that they're going to continue doing with this kind of sleight of hand. And, as storage gets cheaper and as the iPhones gain more and more capacity, I wouldn't be surprised to see the next iPhone, be available in a 128 gig model, which would be incredible. I'm filling out my 32 gig, with 1080p videos of my kids and pictures and music and all this kind of stuff. So, as storage gets cheaper and more prevalent, I think we're going to see more and more of that kind of stuff. And like you said, Rene, I think, they're kind of tipping their hand with some of the features that they're doing currently.
I agree. we're going to put the questions on hold, and we're going to do next week. We'll continue the Q&A because I got a lot more than I thought we did. I want to just talk about Going Pro for a minute, David, because you did an excellent blog post on Launch Center Pro, and this is something we didn't get. iOS 6 did not fix any of the core App Store problems we talked about 2 weeks ago. No upgrades, no trials, on and on. So like Tweety 2 before you, I think like Twitterific 3, like the early edition 2, you made the choice to make Launch Center Pro a separate app. but you actually, much to your credit, and something that we recommend more. I wish more people were like this. You got ahead of it and you explained why in advance.
Yeah, it's tough. As an iPhone developer and somebody who's making a living at this, my user base is who I owe my living to. People who buy my apps. I'm incredibly grateful to them for those purchases. But then there's kind of a push and pull. I mean, so Launch Center was a 99-cent app. It's an app that we threw together in a week and iterated on, and I feel like we did some really, really cool stuff, and we kind of uncovered some really interesting ideas. And what the blog post was about is how, after kind of surfacing some of these ideas around, shortcuts in iOS, we decided to dive deep. And when we first started that, I was like, okay, cool. We'll just like throw this up as like an experimental setting, and like, we'll let you play with these gestures for launching, and this is gonna be great. We'll knock it out in 2 weeks, and throw it into the existing app. Well, a month into it, 2 months into it, we're still thinking, okay, at some point we're going to roll this back into the existing app, and it's going to be great as kind of a secondary experience. But then the deeper and deeper we got into it, it just became more clear that it just had to be its own app. There were some compatibility issues, upgrade issues. There's just all sorts of things that had changed and have been made different. And yet, Launch Center as it stands, people are still downloading it and getting a great experience. And so, for the average person, I think Launch Center is still a great app. And yet, we've been working on some really cool new stuff. And so, ultimately we decided to release 2 new apps, and I'm, as convinced as I may sound in my blog post, I'm still not sure that was the perfect decision. It'll be interesting to see if at 99 cents, Launch Center is still a compelling app. And if, as a pro version, Launch Center Pro is compelling at the price point we set for it. So, there's so much push and pull as a developer. We've talked about this a lot before, that selling an app for 99 cents, unless you're Angry Birds, is just not sustainable. I mean, you can't sell an app for 99 cents and expect, continued upgrades unless it's in the top, 200 apps. If for those of you out there listening, if you downloaded a 99-cent app and it's not in the top 200 apps and you're expecting a ton of stuff, you're basically expecting the developer to throw good money after bad, to continue working on this app that is just a financial pit. And, as hard as it is to say that or even admit that, I mean, that's what these apps can turn into for a developer. When you're losing money on it, spending time on it is throwing good money after bad. And at the end of the day, I mean, I know some people, this will really tick some people off, but, for 99 cents, it's just hard to imagine some giant social contract that a developer is going to update an app for years and like add all these new features. I mean, you don't get a pack of chewing gum for 99 cents.
If you buy a Windows 7 phone today, you're not even getting Windows 8.
Yeah, I mean, seriously. And so, again, and I mean, I hate to just go on and on about pricing, and, it's one of my soapboxes, but at 99 cents, it's just, it's people see the exceptions, the doodle jumps, the Angry Birds, and then they expect that, us developers are making bank and
David.
Just greedy and everything else. And that is just not true at all. I mean, most of us are just scrapping it out. And what's so surprising too is that, there's kind of a fallacy in the argument anyways, that to expect so much for free and then expect continued development, those two things can't coexist. Yeah. So, do you want to pay more money, or do you want, simple apps that don't get updated? And or
do you want the free app with the $20 in-app purchase?
Right. Well, and neither of those are necessarily mutually exclusive. But it's only the exceptions to the rule where you can charge 99 cents and continue pouring time and money into something. So that's just not how it works.
And I'd like to announce... Oh, sorry. I was going to say your Launch Center Pro is launching tomorrow, and our very own Seth Clifford has a review ready and waiting for when it hits the App Store.
Oh, sweet. Thanks.
No problem. I savage it, so I hope you're ready for it.
I am ready.
Well said.
All right,
So somebody in the chat room was asking how much it is. The app Launch Center Pro is actually going to be $5, and we're going to have a launch special for probably the first week or two of $2.99. So
nice. So
there's your pricing
Wow.
info.
And we'll have all that up tomorrow. The minute David allows us to put it up, and a special behind the scenes WWDC video of him telling us all about it.
Sweet.
Check it out. David, where can we find out more about you?
appcubby.com and Dr. Barnard on Twitter.
Very nice. Seth Clifford, sir.
Seth Clifford on Twitter, here and on Iterate with Rene and Mark. And if you want to see our work, nickelfish.com.
Be there. Georgia?
Georgia at TIPB. At Georgia TIPB, and also on the website www.imore.com.
And is it true there's a Zen and Tech right after this show?
There is right away after.
Double feature. Awesome. I feel like I'm going to the drive-in. Nice. You can find me at Rene Ritchie. You can find all of us at iMore. You can find all of our shows at mobilenations.com/shows. We are here each and every week. You can email us at podcast@imore.com or just leave a comment when the show goes live. We have a ton more questions for next week, but if we didn't address yours, you can leave it in the comments and we will make sure we get to it next week. Guys, thank you so much. iOS 6 is just the beginning. We have months of this ahead. It's going to be fun.
Mm-hmm.
Clock.
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 Nice.
Clock.
Well,